Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be diving into the world of Gen Z slang.
Yeah.
I thought this was going to be just a bunch of new words to learn, but
Mhm.
in doing research for this deep dive, I realized it's so much more than that.
It really is.
Like we're talking about uncovering surprising origins, how this impacts different parts of our culture, and we might even learn a thing or two about how language evolves. I mean, that's what I love about these deep dives.
Absolutely.
I've got some fascinating dictionaries, academic papers, news articles, all ready to be unpacked.
Yeah, you're right. These words, they may seem simple on the surface, but when you dig a little deeper, you start to see these are really giving us kind of like a peek into the minds of a generation
Yeah.
that's coming of age in a world that's vastly different from, maybe when we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
A generation that's grappling with, social media and economic uncertainty, a whole new set of social norms.
Right.
And so really, we're not just trying to understand their vocabulary. We're trying to decipher a cultural code.
I love that, deciphering a cultural code. And to crack this code, I started with the basics, dictionary.com. You got your typical definitions in there, but then there are these words where you're like, wait, what? That's been around that long? Like, for example, no cap.
Yeah, no caps.
No cap, I thought was brand new, but apparently it dates back to the early 1900s.
It's amazing, isn't it, how slang can have these hidden histories. And it's not just no cap. Think about the word simp.
Mm.
I think we tend to associate that with, like, online culture today.
Right, exactly.
But it actually has its roots in the 1980s.
Exactly. And speaking of unexpected origins, it's different. A phrase that feels very much of this moment
Yeah.
actually emerged from the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, a perfect illustration, really, of how slang often originates in marginalized communities. And as that dictionary.com article pointed out,
Yeah.
it's a fine line between appreciation
Yeah.
and appropriation.
Yeah, that's right.
When these terms make their way into broader usage,
That's true. It's true. And boy, does language travel fast these days. The Wikipedia article on Gen Z slang, it's like its own dictionary.
It's huge.
It's enormous. It's fascinating to me how many of these terms have roots in AAVE and ball culture.
Right. It really highlights, this incredible interplay we see between language and culture.
Yeah.
And how the digital age has really accelerated linguistic innovation in a way that we haven't really seen before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, physical distance is less relevant.
Right.
Culture, however, is a driving force,
Yeah.
And that's what some researchers found in that paper we have. They found that slang often emerges from these cultural hubs and then spreads outwards. Like you can trace the movement of language across those maps they created.
Yeah. And it's wild to me how this is impacting the workplace. Like I was reading this article, how Gen Z slang is revolutionizing workplace jargon.
Seriously.
It's fascinating. Like who
Completely.
needs synergy when you can slay a presentation?
Right. I know. It's a fascinating example of how language evolves to reflect these changing social dynamics, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So these terms like slay, or if you think about like riz, they're not just about sounding cool or trendy. They're really about confidence, right? It's about owning your accomplishments.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that's a really subtle but powerful shift, especially, when we're talking about these environments that have traditionally been very formal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even just about like individual success. Think about understood the assignment.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That one's about going above and beyond, exceeding expectations. And there's often this like sense of like collective understanding, like you and your coworkers are all in on the joke.
Totally. It speaks to this desire for authenticity, right?
Yeah, yes.
Like just being real, keeping it
Yeah.
real, which resonates so strongly with Gen Z. And you see this desire for authenticity also plays out, I think,
Yeah.
in how they use language to kind of critique the status quo.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Like that New York Times piece, how Gen Z slang reflects their worldview.
Yeah, exactly.
I was saying how like mid and cringe
Cringe.
reflect like disillusionment, especially with things that feel inauthentic or out of touch.
Yes, yes.
Like they're calling out the gap between the idealized version of things and then like the reality.
Just like they're using these simple words, but they're able to express, irony, a kind of skepticism towards,
Yeah.
These traditional power structures.
Right.
Even a bit of dark humor, I think.
Totally. And sometimes that humor can be, pretty pointed, like,
Oh, yeah.
okay, boomer, That Washington Post article really dug into that whole generational divide.
Yeah, it's a great example of how slang can become a flashpoint for these larger cultural conversations, right?
Yeah.
Because on the surface, it's a dismissive phrase, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But it also speaks to this frustration
Right.
that Gen Z feels with what they perceive as a lack of understanding, maybe a lack of empathy from older generations. And it highlights, even just in that phrase, these very different communication styles,
Yeah.
you know?
And it's not just, these bigger phrases. Even individual words can be super revealing. Like I've noticed brain rot popping up more and more lately.
Yeah, brain rot. It really captures, I think, a lot of the anxieties of the digital age, wouldn't you say?
Totally.
It's that feeling of being overwhelmed,
Yeah.
by information overload, like your brain is being turned to mush by just endlessly scrolling and consuming.
Yeah, it's kind of a bleak picture.
Yeah.
But it also feels very relatable. Like we're all living in this hyper-connected world, right?
Yeah, we all feel it.
Constantly bombarded with stuff.
And Gen Z, they've grown up immersed in it.
Totally.
So they're acutely aware of the potential downsides. And I think, brain rot is their way of acknowledging that, expressing that anxiety.
Yeah.
But often with a healthy dose of self-awareness and dark humor, I think, too.
Okay. I need a palate cleanser after that one. How about something a little more lighthearted?
Sure.
Like secure the bag. That's all about, hustling, getting that money.
Right. Right. It is, in a way.
Yeah.
But, it's also about more than just material wealth, isn't it? It's about, it's about achieving security, stability, independence.
Yeah, yeah.
In a world where those things feel increasingly, elusive for young people.
Totally.
I mean, think about it. This is the generation that's come of age during, economic recessions, a global pandemic.
Right.
Like a lot of uncertainty about the future. So secure the bag speaks to that desire for control, for agency.
Totally.
In a world that often feels very chaotic.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about navigating the online world, what about ratio?
Oh, yes.
As in getting ratioed.
Yes, ratio. The ultimate indicator of online approval or disapproval, as it were. But, it speaks to this hyper-awareness of social dynamics that I think is so prevalent in the digital age.
Yeah.
Every post, every comment is subject to instant judgment, instant feedback. And while it might seem, trivial on the surface,
Right.
it really reflects this deep desire for validation,
For sure.
for belonging.
Totally.
That's really amplified in online spaces, right?
It's like the online version of understood the assignment, but with a much harsher grading system.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And, that brings us back to this fascinating tension, I think, that we see running through so much of Gen Z slang.
Yeah.
It's this desire for authenticity, right?
Yeah.
For self-expression, for calling out BS. But also, at the same time, this awareness of how those expressions are received, how they play out in this digital ecosystem that they've grown up in.
It's like they're constantly coding and decoding.
Yeah.
Both reflecting and shaping the language around them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've dived deep into dictionaries, research papers, news articles. What's the biggest takeaway here for you?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that Gen Z slang, it's not just a passing fad.
Right.
It's not just, a bunch of silly words. It's really, I think, like we were saying earlier, a window into their world, their values, their anxieties. It's a reminder that language is constantly evolving, constantly adapting to reflect the changing times.
It's like we said at the beginning, it's about deciphering a cultural code. And by understanding this code, maybe we can gain a deeper appreciation for how this generation communicates, how they see the world,
I think so, too.
what they're trying to tell us.
I think so, yeah, absolutely. And who knows, maybe we'll even pick up a few new words along the way.
No cap. Well, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the ever-evolving world of Gen Z slang. Until next time, stay curious.